Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's working in full cooperation with the U.S. on a common strategy for Gaza after talks with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Netanyahu praised U.S. President Donald Trump's bold vision for Gaza's future and said he and Rubio had discussed ways to ensure that the future becomes a reality. Trump's much criticized plan for the U.S. to take over Gaza and resettle its population has been ruled out by Palestinians and Arab nations. Speaking at a news conference in Jerusalem after their meeting, Rubio and Netanyahu outlined areas of agreement, including a desire to eradicate Hamas's governing capacity, prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon, and to monitor developments in a post-Assad Syria. Netanyahu also condemned what he called lawfare from the International Criminal Court, which he said outrageously libeled Israel. Well, we are now being joined by Errol Markoc to discuss Trump's role in the Israel-Gaza negotiations. Errol joins us from California, I believe. First of all, Errol, good to have you. We have seen a very successful ceasefire deal in a couple of weeks. Why is it now so necessary to hand Israel the Mk-84 bomb while this very delicate process is still ongoing?
Well, I think it speaks to the overall strategy from the Trump administration. It's a speak softly and carry a big stick, Roosevelt-style diplomacy. And I think a lot of these things that we're seeing that are very confusing I admit to myself or to anybody, when the president comes out and says Gaza is now America, that's a little bit confusing. And at first you might take it out, what does this mean? But what does it mean? It means that the Arab countries, Saudi-led coalition with the Qataris, with the Turks to some degree as a majority Muslim country, are all going to realize, hey, there's an opportunity here to rebuild this area, and it can be rebuilt in three ways. It can be rebuilt in the image of America, which I don't think anybody wants. It can be rebuilt in the image of Israel, which I think only Israel wants, or it can be rebuilt as a coalition of nations. And I think that is what these there's the carrot and there's the stick, and they're offering both sides of it. And Donald Trump has always been committed to a sovereign Israeli state. Marco Rubio has come in there and declared the U.S. intentions to back Israel fully. And you see with rising tensions with Iran, especially. This is coming into a whole global scale. So if we're able to build a coalition of people who are willing to go and remake Gaza into a Dubai of the Levant, if you will, then perhaps you're going to see a better bulwark against Iran. So I think the strategy right now is to be confusing to the viewer. The viewer isn't supposed to understand what's going on. It's supposed to be misdirection, because behind the scenes there's quite a lot of deal making, and it looks like a lot of people who would never have done what they're talking about now are going to be open to it out of necessity. So I think it's a little bit of American gamesmanship. You have a different regime. You have people who are global players. They've stated that the U.S. is not an indispensable nation. This is a multipolar world order, and America needs to do what's best for America. And if that means confusing our friends and enemies and everybody for a while, that's what's going to happen. And I think we just need to trust the president and wait and see what happens.
The confusion there for me, but how about the people of Palestine? Are we considering what they really want out of this? I like that you put it on 3 platforms talking about what people might want for Gaza and the Arab nations, and then Israel or American state, and then a coalition of all of that. But what does Palestinians want? It seems like their hopes just rely on the nations around them.
Yes, it certainly does. It's not a pleasant scenario whatsoever, and it's not a scenario that this administration has created. This is a 75-year conflict, and there's nothing positive about forcibly or however you want to describe this, displacing people from their home. However, their home has been completely destroyed. And if you go look at maps from 1960, it's shrunken down to almost nothing. So, I mean, it very much mirrors what has happened in other parts of the world where there has been population resettlements, whether that be what happened to the Native Americans or whatever happened in Pakistan, when India, when the partition. I mean, these are not positive experiences. So this is going to be the first 21st century attempt at population resettlement. And they have a chance to take what has been always an ugly and nasty part of human history and potentially do something positive. Now, I'm not here to advocate for the total situation, but I will say that if they're able to build communities inside of Egypt or inside of Jordan, you're going to see potentially a better future, and bringing people back on new terms, that seems to be the only way. That whole place has been devastated. There's effectively been a complete washout of the Palestinian foothold in that country to the point now that they have just a little dot. And I think as much as it sounds counterintuitive, Donald Trump is looking at this as a humanitarian. What are you going to do? You're going to go back there and rebuild out of the rubble, surrounded by IEDs and booby-trapped bombs. You're going to go back and then what? Hamas is going to be back in charge of Gaza and we're going to start bombing them again. There's no positive way forward. So it takes somebody who's not concerned about short-term legacy. Somebody like Donald Trump who only has one term and he's gone. And that's why this is happening now. It's not a pleasant thing. It's not something that anybody wants to see. And is it fair to the Gazans? No, it's not fair to the Gazans. And they've had a very unfair situation for many times. But they've also rebuffed many overtures over the years towards peace, towards a two-state solution, to the point where the rest of the world, including the Arab world, has not stood up for them, has not stood up for the people of Gaza. Nobody really has. Donald Trump is the only person who's saying, I want to build beautiful, wonderful cities for them, give everybody a house, rebuild this area and some new vision. It's dynamic, it's in some ways insensitive, but on the other hand, if you look at it from the perspective of somebody trying to solve the problem as opposed to continue and perpetuate this problem, which has no solution, it seems to be one of the cruel facts of life that population resettlement might be the cure here. And again, that's a tough thing to say on television or privately, but it certainly is the direction that we're going. And if it can be done correctly with dignity and compassion, and a better world can be built from it, then I think it's a necessary evil that we're going to have to go down.
So here's the thing about the conversation we're having. The Arab nations are against them taking in Gazans. Where do we expect them to move to? That's on one hand. Secondly, how are we sure they're going to come back to their territory secured?
Yeah, well, when it comes to the first one, I think a lot of it has to do with America. Let's take Egypt, for example. Outside of Israel and a couple other countries, Egypt receives the most military aid from the United States. They're run by effectively a general, and that whole country is a military state for all intent and purpose. Now, they don't have the capacity to influx this many Palestinians into Egyptian society. It's a very large population, very poor population, but they do have a lot of land in the Sinai and other areas that could be partitioned or given as a special protectorate. And I think that's a solution there. When you think of Jordan, you have to think about how did the king of Jordan come into power? Well, the Ottomans put him into power and they were disposed about 10 years later, and the British Empire imagine that monarchy. So this is a monarchy that's always been a vassal state to either the British or eventually to the Americans. And they've done a very good job with it. I mean, East Jordan land, West Jordan land, they have much more cultural comparison to the Palestinians. So again, they don't have a lot of ground to stand on when they are sort of completely beholden to the Western powers that are the reason why their monarchies and their dictatorships are able to stand up against their outside world, is because of U.S. backing. And without that backing, they will collapse. So if Trump says, I'll take that away, then they're going to have to play ball. Because like he said, when a reporter asked him, they haven't talked to me yet. And now the real question is, how can we get people who are non-violent, non-Hamas affiliated back to Gaza? I mean, that's going to be a really important question. I don't think there can be any guarantees that can be given, but I think there can be shows of good faith. Certainly, everybody in Gaza is not related to Hamas or related to any sort of terroristic activities. And so there should be a place for a return of Palestinians in this new Gaza. How that looks, what that means, does that mean there's an international city? Does that mean some sort of workers permit? I mean, I don't think you're ever going to bring all of the people back based on what they're talking about. They're trying to build new cities, new worlds, if you will, in these neighboring countries. And those neighboring countries are going to eventually have to play ball with Donald Trump because Donald Trump controls their purse strings.
So Biden had paused their shipment of weapons to Israel because of the danger, even though he had himself sent some to Israel, but stopped due to the danger in the region and how delicate it is. Now that Trump is pursuing peace, so to speak, one wonders, why have an olive branch and a dagger at the same time? Is it the confusion thing you're talking about?
Yes, it's the American policy of speak softly and carry a big stick. You have both at the same time. On one hand, we're talking about detente, we're talking about progressive peace policies. On the other hand, we're giving incredibly blunt instruments that will completely devastate one side of the equation if they're applied. So you're putting your finger on the scales in different ways to create leverage, to create negotiation. That's the idea here. The idea is now we've put the bombs back in their hands. These guys have said they'll use it if they don't get their hostages back. Trump was very sincere about the hostage return, some of them American citizens. And I think a lot of that has to go towards that show of force, just like we saw the B-52 bombers land in the UK recently. That's both a show to Mr. Putin, but also a show to whatever factions are left in that region, that the U.S. definitely has the ability to come in and completely obliterate a situation in a way that the Israelis cannot do. So I think it's a speak softly, carry a big stick. Again, is that how things were done in the last 20 years? No, not really, but the world has gotten much less safe. There's been so many awful wars that haven't gone anywhere, nothing succeeded. And so I think it's going back to that old American philosophy of we're happy to help, but if you don't want to help us, we will destroy you. And I think that's what President Trump is pushing with here.
Errol, I'd like to get your thoughts on the Arab nations refusing to take the Palestinians. Trump has made it clear he would want them to move so he can rebuild the city. Arab nation says no, Trump says yes. Where does that leave them?
Well, that leaves them at a security impasse. The United States guarantees the security of all the global shipping of oil that exists. The United States Navy is the reason why you're able to move all your LNG out of Qatar or all of the petroleum out of Saudi Arabia. The pipelines are going through NATO countries, whether it be in through Turkey or where is it going? And the end consumers of their product is mostly Western nations. On top of it, a long time ago, we realized it was a much better idea to let them pump oil out of the Middle East, and we print dollars, and we give them dollars, and they give us their actual resources. So we've been effectively strip mining the Middle East of their oil for paper we print for nothing, and they're addicted to that paper, and they have no choice but to keep begging for that paper because they produce nothing of value besides the mineral rights under their ground. And if we decide to turn off that spigot and we turn off the military support for these effectively dictatorships that have run the Middle East since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, they're going to have nowhere to turn to. Russia can't back them, and China's not going to get involved. So they need us way more than we need them. We are the largest exporter of oil in the world now. The time of OPEC and the time of the Arab nations having influence over us is finished. We control the show. We'll tell them what to do. And if they say no, they have the right to do that. And we will pull all of our soldiers back, and we will not secure their ships when they sail around the world. And that's the cruel fact of the matter. No more Mr. Nice Guy. America's here to play, and America's here to win.
All right, then let's see what happens with Rubio's meeting with the Arab nations and, of course, Ukraine and Russia in the coming days. Thank you so much, Errol Markoc, for joining us on the Rise American.